There is a particular kind of sadness that rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with dramatic endings, slammed doors, or words spoken in anger. It arrives quietly, often disguised as devotion. It hides inside the messages you send that receive little response. It lingers in the concern you offer that is never returned. It lives in the hours you spend thinking about someone who rarely thinks about you in the same way. And because it wears the mask of love, many people never recognize it. They simply call it caring. But there comes a moment in every life when a difficult question appears. What if the pain is not that you love too much? What if the pain is that you keep pouring your love into places that cannot receive it? Imagine standing beside a beautiful garden carrying buckets of water. Every morning you return. Every evening you return. You water the soil faithfully. But the ground beneath your feet is stone. No matter how sincere your effort, nothing grows. Not because water is bad, not because your devotion lacks purity, but because stone cannot absorb what only living soil can receive. Many people spend years believing they are somehow flawed because their love does not bloom in the hearts of certain people. They wonder whether they should become more attractive, more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. They spend entire chapters of life trying to solve a mystery that has only one answer. The problem was never the water. The problem was the stone. Yet human beings rarely accept this truth easily, because somewhere deep within us lives an ancient hope. The hope that if we love hard enough we can transform another person's capacity to receive love. We imagine that enough patience can heal emotional distance, enough sacrifice can awaken gratitude, enough loyalty can create intimacy, enough understanding can produce reciprocity. But love cannot create a doorway where none exists. It cannot force open a heart that has chosen to remain closed. And perhaps one of the most painful discoveries of adulthood is realizing that some people are not rejecting your love. They are simply unable to hold it. This distinction changes everything. When a child offers a treasure to someone who cannot see its value, the treasure remains precious. Its worth does not disappear because another person failed to recognize it. Yet adults often forget this. They measure the value of their love by the response it receives. If someone appreciates them, they feel worthy. If someone ignores them, they feel diminished. If someone leaves, they question their own value. But the sun does not become less radiant because a blind man cannot see it. A song does not lose its beauty because a deaf ear cannot hear it. And your capacity to love does not become smaller because another person cannot receive what you offer. There is a deeper psychological mystery beneath this pattern. Why do so many people repeatedly give their love to those who cannot receive it? The answer often begins long before romance, long before adulthood, long before conscious choice. Somewhere in childhood, many people learn a dangerous lesson. They learn that love must be earned, that attention requires performance, that acceptance depends upon pleasing others, that worth comes through sacrifice. So they grow up believing love is a task rather than a connection, an achievement rather than a meeting, a struggle rather than a mutual exchange. Without realizing it, they become attracted to emotional unavailability, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. The psyche often mistakes familiarity for destiny, and so people spend years trying to win affection from those who remain distant, not because the relationship nourishes them, but because some forgotten part of themselves still hopes to solve an ancient wound. Every unavailable person becomes a symbolic figure. Every rejection becomes another opportunity to prove worth. Every disappointment becomes another chapter in a story that began long ago. But healing begins when you recognize the pattern. Not with judgment, not with shame, simply with awareness. Awareness is the first light that enters a dark room. The moment you see clearly, transformation becomes possible. You begin to notice how often you abandon yourself to maintain connection, how often you silence your needs, how often you tolerate emotional starvation because you fear loneliness. Yet loneliness is a strange thing. Many people fear being alone more than being unseen. They fear an empty room more than an empty relationship. But there is a loneliness that exists even in the presence of others. It is the loneliness of giving your soul to someone who never truly meets you. The loneliness of speaking while never feeling heard. The loneliness of loving while never feeling received. And that loneliness can become far heavier than solitude. Because solitude at least leaves room for self-discovery. An unreciprocated relationship often leaves room only for self-abandonment. There comes a moment when the soul grows tired, not bitter, not cynical, simply tired. Tired of knocking on doors that never open. Tired of explaining its value. Tired of performing for acceptance. Tired of shrinking itself to fit into spaces where it was never welcomed. And in that exhaustion, something sacred begins to emerge. A new understanding. The realization that love is not meant to be chased. It is meant to be shared. Real love feels less like persuasion and more like recognition. less like convincing and more like meeting, less like hunger and more like nourishment. When two people can truly receive one another, love becomes surprisingly simple, not effortless, but natural, like breathing, like rivers flowing toward the sea, like sunlight entering an open window. No force is required, no performance is necessary, no constant proving must occur. Something deeper takes place, mutual presence, mutual respect, mutual openness. And perhaps this is why the most profound act of love is not giving more. It is seeing clearly, seeing who is capable of receiving what you offer, seeing who meets your sincerity with sincerity, seeing who protects your heart rather than merely benefiting from it. Because wisdom is not learning how to love less. Wisdom is learning where love belongs. The mature heart does not become colder, it becomes discerning. It understands that generosity without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Compassion without wisdom becomes suffering. Devotion without reciprocity becomes depletion. So it learns to honor itself, not through selfishness, but through truth. And truth sometimes whispers what we desperately wish to avoid hearing. This person cannot receive what you keep giving. Not now. Perhaps not ever. And accepting that reality can feel like mourning, because you are not only letting go of a person, you are letting go of a possibility, a dream, a future you imagined, a version of the story you hoped would unfold. Yet something beautiful happens when you stop forcing love into closed hands. Your energy returns, your attention returns, your life returns. You begin remembering that the love you were desperately trying to give away was never separate from you. It originated within you. The kindness, the patience, the tenderness, the devotion. These qualities were always yours. You merely forgot their source. And when you remember, an extraordinary shift occurs. You stop standing outside locked doors. You stop begging for recognition. You stop treating your heart as something that must earn permission to exist. Instead, you become a steward of your own inner world, a guardian of your own dignity, a caretaker of your own soul. Then love changes. It becomes less about finding someone to complete you, and more about sharing what is already whole. Less about proving worth and more about expressing it. Less about fear and more about freedom. And perhaps the deepest revelation is this: the greatest tragedy is not loving someone who cannot receive your love. The greatest tragedy is forgetting that you deserve to receive love too. For years you may have stood beside stone, believing your water was the problem. But one day you discover a different truth. The water was never lacking. The water was life itself. And when life finally finds fertile ground, it does what it has always been meant to do. It grows, it blossoms, it becomes a garden. The love you keep giving away was never asking you to become smaller. It was asking you to find the place where it could finally bloom. And the moment you understand that, you realize something that changes everything. The love you have been searching for and another person's ability to receive you has been quietly teaching you how to receive yourself. There is a profound difference between someone refusing your love and someone being unable to receive it. Yet most people spend years confusing the two. They interpret emotional distance as a challenge to overcome, a puzzle to solve, or a test they must pass. The more unavailable another person becomes, the more determined they feel to prove the depth of their care. They believe that if they can only find the right words, show enough patience, or sacrifice enough of themselves, eventually the wall will crumble. Eventually the door will open. But life often teaches a different lesson. Imagine offering a precious gift to someone whose hands are already closed. It does not matter how valuable the gift is. It does not matter how carefully it was chosen or how sincerely it was given. If the hands remain closed, nothing can be received. The gift remains suspended between giver and receiver, carrying all the weight of hope, expectation, and disappointment. This is what happens in many relationships. Love continues to flow outward, but there is no place for it to land. Affection is offered, but it finds no home. Understanding is extended, but it is never fully met. The person giving begins to feel confused because they know their feelings are genuine. They know the care they offer is real. Yet despite all their effort, the connection never deepens in the way they long for. What makes this experience so painful is that the human heart naturally searches for explanations. It rarely accepts limitations at face value. Instead, it turns inward and begins questioning itself. Perhaps I am not interesting enough. Perhaps I am asking for too much. Perhaps if I become more patient, more attractive, more understanding, things will change. Slowly, a dangerous belief begins to form. The belief that love is something that must be earned through self-sacrifice. Many people do not realize how often they abandon themselves while trying to keep another person close. They ignore their own needs, silence their disappointments, and lower their expectations. They convince themselves that understanding means accepting emotional absence. They mistake endurance for intimacy. What began as love gradually becomes a quiet negotiation in which they trade pieces of themselves for moments of attention. Yet genuine connection does not require constant bargaining. When someone can truly receive love, there is a natural movement toward mutuality. Care creates care. Vulnerability invites vulnerability. Presence meets presence. There is effort, certainly, but the effort feels shared rather than one-sided. Both people participate in the creation of the relationship. When someone cannot receive love, however, the dynamic feels very different. One person becomes the source of emotional energy, while the other remains distant, distracted, or unavailable. The relationship begins to resemble a well that never fills no matter how much water is poured into it. The giver grows exhausted, not because they love too deeply, but because they loved in a place where their love could not take root. The hardest truth is that another person's inability to receive your love is not necessarily a reflection of your worth. People carry unseen histories, fears, wounds, and defenses. Some have spent so long protecting themselves that they no longer know how to welcome genuine affection. Others are emotionally asleep to their own needs, making it impossible for them to recognize the needs of someone else. Recognizing this does not erase the sadness, but it changes its meaning. Instead of asking why you were not enough, you begin asking whether the connection was capable of becoming what you hoped it could be. And in that shift, something important happens. You stop measuring the value of your love by another person's response. You begin understanding that the tragedy was never that your gift lacked value. The tragedy was simply that it was being offered to hands that were never open enough to receive it. Long before we begin choosing romantic partners, friendships, or the people to whom we give our deepest loyalty, something within us is already learning what love means. These lessons are rarely taught through words. They are absorbed through experiences, repeated interactions, subtle emotional atmospheres, and the countless moments that shape a child's understanding of connection. By the time we reach adulthood, many of our beliefs about love feel so natural that we mistake them for truth. A child enters the world with a simple desire to be seen, accepted, and cherished. Yet not every child experiences love as something freely given. Some grow up in environments where affection feels unpredictable. Attention may arrive only when achievements are accomplished. Praise may depend upon performance. Emotional warmth may appear one day and disappear the next. The child learns, often unconsciously, that love is not something they naturally deserve. It becomes something they must earn. At first, this adaptation serves a purpose. Children are remarkably intelligent when it comes to survival. If approval comes through pleasing others, they become people pleasers. If affection comes through being helpful, they become caretakers. If safety comes through suppressing their own needs, they become experts at self-sacrifice. These strategies help them maintain connection with the people they depend upon. The problem is that these survival patterns rarely disappear with age. The child grows into an adult, but the emotional blueprint remains hidden beneath the surface. Without realizing it, they begin seeking relationships that feel familiar rather than healthy. Familiarity creates a strange sense of comfort, even when it causes pain. The psyche often returns to what it knows because what is known feels safer than what is unknown. This is why some people repeatedly find themselves drawn toward emotionally distant individuals. The attraction may feel mysterious at first. There is an intense desire to win the person's affection, to gain their approval, or to finally become important enough to receive the love that seems just out of reach. What feels like romance is often intertwined with something much older. The adult is not only relating to the person standing before them, they are also relating to an unresolved emotional history. Somewhere deep inside, a forgotten part of them is still trying to complete a story that never reached a satisfying ending. Every withheld text message feels larger than it should. Every moment of emotional distance feels unusually painful. Every small sign of attention creates an enormous surge of hope. The emotional intensity often comes not from the present relationship alone, but from the past quietly echoing through it. What makes this pattern difficult to recognize is that it can masquerade as devotion. The person believes they are simply loving deeply. They pride themselves on being loyal, patient, and understanding. Yet beneath these qualities may exist a hidden fear. The fear that if they stop giving, stop proving, or stop trying, they will lose love altogether. As a result, they continue investing energy into people who offer little in return. They become experts at understanding others while neglecting themselves. They offer endless compassion but struggle to ask for what they need. Their worth becomes tied to how much they can endure. Healing begins when this pattern becomes visible, not through blame toward parents, circumstances, or the past, but through awareness. The moment a person recognizes that they have been confusing love with earning, something begins to shift. They start questioning the old belief that affection must be purchased through sacrifice. Slowly, they discover a new possibility. Real love does not require constant proof of value. Genuine connection does not demand endless emotional labor to secure acceptance. The healthiest relationships are not built upon one person desperately seeking validation from another. They are built upon mutual recognition, where both individuals feel free to be themselves without fear that love will disappear the moment they stop performing for it. One of the great mysteries of human behavior is that we are often drawn toward what hurts us. Even when we consciously desire something better, we tell ourselves that we want peace, stability, and genuine connection. Yet we repeatedly find ourselves captivated by people who are distant, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. From the outside, the pattern can seem irrational. Friends may see it clearly and wonder why we keep returning to the same kind of relationship. Yet from within, it feels almost inevitable, as though some invisible force is guiding us toward a familiar destination. The reason is that the human psyche does not always pursue what is healthiest. More often it pursues what feels familiar. Familiarity possesses a powerful influence over our choices. The mind is naturally drawn toward environments, dynamics, and emotional experiences that resemble what it has known before. Even painful experiences can create a strange sense of comfort simply because they are recognizable. What is familiar requires less uncertainty. It feels like home, even when that home was filled with loneliness, confusion, or unmet needs. This is why emotional unavailability can sometimes feel magnetic. The distant person awakens something deep within us. Their unpredictability creates anticipation. Their inconsistency generates longing. Their occasional moments of warmth feel extraordinarily meaningful because they are rare. Instead of receiving steady affection, we find ourselves chasing fleeting moments of connection. The mind interprets this pursuit as love, but often it is something else entirely. When affection is freely available, it can feel unfamiliar to someone who learned early in life that love must be earned. Consistency may seem boring. Reliability may feel strange. Emotional openness may even create discomfort. Deep within, there is a hidden expectation that love should involve struggle. If there is no challenge, no uncertainty, no emotional chase, part of the psyche may wonder whether the connection is truly valuable. This creates a painful paradox. The very qualities that make a relationship healthy may initially feel less exciting, while the qualities that create suffering can generate intense emotional attraction. Many people mistake this intensity for destiny. They describe meeting someone and feeling an immediate, overwhelming pull. They think constantly about the person. They feel emotional highs when attention is received and crushing lows when it is withdrawn. The experience feels powerful, significant, and impossible to ignore. Yet intensity and compatibility are not the same thing. A storm is intense. A hurricane is intense. But intensity alone does not create safety, nourishment, or growth. Sometimes what we call destiny is actually an old wound seeking resolution. The emotionally unavailable person becomes a symbol. Without realizing it, we project onto them hopes, fears, and unmet emotional needs that originated long before the relationship began. We imagine that if this particular person finally chooses us, values us, or loves us completely, something inside us will finally heal. The relationship becomes larger than itself. It is no longer simply about two people getting to know one another. It becomes an unconscious quest for validation, acceptance, and emotional completion. This is why letting go can feel so difficult. We are not only releasing a person, we are releasing a dream. We are releasing the fantasy that one perfect outcome will repair years of self-doubt or erase old feelings of unworthiness. The pain of this realization is undeniable, but it is also liberating. Because once we recognize the pattern, we begin to see that destiny may not be the force drawing us toward emotional unavailability. Habit is, familiarity is, unresolved longing is, and what has been learned can be unlearned. The heart can develop a new understanding of love. It can learn that safety is not weakness, consistency is not boredom, availability is not something to distrust. Over time, the nervous system begins to recognize that genuine intimacy does not require endless pursuit. Real love rarely feels like running through a maze hoping to find an exit. It feels more like arriving somewhere you no longer need to prove that you belong. It offers space to rest, to be seen, and to exist without constantly questioning your worth. And when that understanding begins to take root, the old illusion starts to fade. What once felt like destiny reveals itself as a familiar road, and for the first time you become free to choose a different path. There is a loneliness that comes from being physically alone, and most people understand it well. It appears during quiet evenings, empty weekends, or moments when no one is around to share our thoughts. Yet there is another form of loneliness that is far more difficult to describe, and often far more painful. It is the loneliness that exists in the presence of another person. It is the loneliness of loving someone deeply while feeling unseen by them. It is the loneliness of sharing your heart while sensing that your words never truly arrive where they were meant to go. This kind of loneliness rarely appears all at once. It develops gradually, almost invisibly. In the beginning, there is hope, there is excitement, there is the belief that understanding will grow with time, and that emotional distance is only temporary. You tell yourself that the other person is busy, distracted, overwhelmed, or simply moving at a different pace. You remain patient because patience feels like love. But as weeks become months, and months become years, something begins to change. You notice that you are always the one initiating the deeper conversations. You are the one remembering important details, checking in, asking questions, and making space for emotional connection. You become the keeper of the relationship's emotional life. Without your effort, everything seems to drift into silence. At first, you do not mind. Caring feels natural to you. You genuinely want the other person to feel supported and understood. Yet over time, a quiet exhaustion begins to emerge. Not because you resent giving, but because you slowly realize how little is coming back. The strange thing about this loneliness is that it often hides behind moments that appear normal from the outside. You may sit beside someone every day and still feel emotionally abandoned. You may exchange messages, share meals, or spend years together while carrying the persistent feeling that an invisible wall exists between you. The deepest human need is not simply to be near another person. It is to be known by them. To be known means that your inner world matters, your fears matter, your dreams matter, your struggles matter, your joys matter. It means that another person is genuinely curious about who you are beneath the surface. When this kind of recognition is absent, something inside the soul begins to ache. Many people trapped in unreciprocated relationships become experts at understanding others while remaining strangers to those they love. They can describe every detail of the other person's life, emotions, and preferences. Yet if asked whether they feel truly understood in return, they struggle to answer honestly. Part of the reason they stay is hope. Hope is one of the most beautiful and dangerous forces in human life. It allows us to endure difficult seasons, but it can also persuade us to remain in situations that continually diminish us. We keep believing that the breakthrough is coming. We convince ourselves that one conversation, one realization, or one moment of vulnerability will finally create the closeness we have been waiting for. Sometimes that happens. But sometimes it does not. And accepting that reality can feel heartbreaking because it forces us to confront a painful truth. Effort alone cannot create mutual connection. No amount of love can substitute for another person's willingness to participate emotionally. This realization often brings grief, not because the relationship was entirely without value, but because it was unable to become what you hoped it would be. You mourn the conversations that never happened, the understanding that never arrived, and the intimacy that always seemed just beyond reach. Yet within this grief lies an important awakening. You begin to understand that loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of emotional presence. And once you recognize this, you stop measuring relationships by proximity alone. You start looking for something deeper, a connection where your thoughts are welcomed, your feelings are heard, and your inner world is met with the same care you have spent so much of your life offering to others. For a long time, many people believe that love is defined by how much they can endure. They think that loyalty means staying, patience means waiting, and devotion means continuing to give even when nothing is returned. There is a kind of emotional pride that can develop from this. A quiet identity forms around being the one who tries harder, loves deeper, and understands more. But beneath this identity, something begins to weaken. The self becomes stretched thin, the heart becomes overextended, and love, instead of feeling alive, begins to feel like labor. What is often missed in these experiences is that love itself is not the problem. Love is not what drains a person. The direction in which love is placed determines whether it becomes life-giving or life-depleting. When love is given to someone who is capable of receiving it, something natural happens. There is movement, there is response, there is emotional exchange. The connection feels alive, not because it is effortless, but because it is reciprocal. Even in difficult moments, there is a shared willingness to understand, to repair, and to remain emotionally present. This creates a kind of inner stability that allows love to deepen rather than erode. But when love is placed in a situation where it cannot be received, the experience becomes very different. It is not simply that the other person is distant. It is that there is no emotional soil for the love to enter. The more you offer, the more you feel yourself dispersing. It begins to resemble pouring water into a surface that cannot absorb it. Nothing is retained, nothing grows, and eventually, even the giver starts to feel depleted, not because their love is insufficient, but because it is being offered in a place that cannot hold it. The difficulty is that many people do not recognize this early enough. They interpret lack of response as something they must overcome. They believe that if they adjust themselves, become more understanding, more patient, more forgiving, then eventually the situation will change. They confuse endurance with transformation. But endurance without reciprocity does not transform the relationship. It gradually transforms the person giving the love into someone who no longer recognizes their own needs. Choosing fertile ground, in contrast, is not about giving up on love. It is about respecting it. It is about recognizing that love is not meant to exist in conditions where it must constantly justify its own existence. It is about understanding that mutual emotional availability is not a luxury, but a requirement for genuine connection to grow. This choice often requires letting go of what could have been, not because it lacked emotional meaning, but because it lacked the structure needed for it to become sustainable. That letting go can feel like loss, because the mind holds on to potential just as strongly as it holds on to reality. Yet over time, something important becomes clear. Potential that never becomes reciprocal connection eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. When a person begins to shift their attention toward relationships where care is mutual, something subtle but profound happens. They stop mistaking emotional struggle for depth. They stop confusing absence with mystery. They begin to notice how peace feels in the body when love is not something constantly being chased or proven. Fertile ground does not demand that you become smaller to be accepted. It does not require that you constantly question your worth. It allows love to exist without distortion, and in such spaces, love does not disappear into emptiness. It roots itself, it stabilizes, it expands, and slowly a new understanding emerges. Love was never meant to survive in places where it could not be received. It was meant to grow where it is met, recognized, and returned. There is a moment in every emotional journey where understanding stops being theoretical and becomes deeply personal. It is no longer about observing patterns in relationships or recognizing psychological truths in others. It becomes about oneself, about the quiet realization that the way you have been loving has also been shaping the way you see your own worth. And in that moment, something fundamental begins to shift. You begin to notice that you have spent so much of your emotional life reaching outward that you forgot how to stay with yourself. You have been so focused on being chosen that you forgot to ask whether you were also choosing yourself. You have been so attentive to who responds to your love that you stopped noticing how little of it you allowed to return inward. This is where the final transformation begins. Not in the act of giving love more wisely, but in learning how to receive it, especially from yourself. For a long time, people believe that self-love is a comforting idea, something abstract and gentle. But in reality, it is often uncomfortable at first because it requires unlearning old emotional reflexes. If a person has spent years equating love with sacrifice, then receiving becomes unfamiliar. If they have learned that their value lies in what they provide for others, then resting in their own worth can feel undeserved. So they continue to overextend themselves. They continue to prove, explain, and adapt. Not because they are unaware, but because part of them still believes that if they stop trying, they will lose connection entirely. The idea of being without that connection feels heavier than the quiet erosion of self. But there is a turning point where exhaustion begins to speak louder than fear. It is not a dramatic breaking point. It is subtle. A moment of stillness where the question arises without force. What if I stopped trying to earn what should be freely given? What if I stopped abandoning myself in order to stay connected to people who are not truly meeting me? This question opens a door inward. At first, what you encounter there is not peace, but absence. The absence of all the external validation you have grown accustomed to. The absence of constant emotional engagement. The absence of the familiar rhythm of giving without return. And in that silence, discomfort surfaces. Because without external confirmation, you are left alone with your own sense of value. But this is where something essential begins to develop. Slowly, you start recognizing that your worth was never supposed to be measured by another person's capacity to receive you. You begin to see that the love you kept offering outward was not meant to disappear when it was not accepted. It still exists within you. It has always existed within you. It was never dependent on someone else's recognition to be real. This realization does not make longing disappear, but it changes its direction. Instead of seeking completion from those who cannot offer it, you begin to turn inward with a different kind of attention. You start noticing how often you ignored your own emotional needs while trying to meet everyone else's. You start acknowledging the parts of you that were waiting for care that never arrived externally. And slowly, something unexpected happens. The love you once scattered in places that could not hold it begins to gather back toward its source. It becomes less about chasing and more about honoring, less about proving and more about acknowledging, less about earning and more about allowing. Receiving love from yourself is not a single moment of realization. It is a continuous practice of no longer abandoning yourself in situations that require you to disappear in order to belong. It is the quiet decision to stop negotiating your worth in spaces that cannot recognize it. It is the gentle return to your own presence. And in that return, something deeply stabilizing emerges. You begin to understand that the love you were searching for outside was not something missing within you. It was something you had been overlooking all along. buried beneath years of trying to be enough for everyone else. The final revelation is not that you must find love. It is that you must stop forgetting that you are already capable of holding it.